Okay, we have the screen up.
Okay, all right. So it's right on 7, I believe.
We're ready to go.
All right. Good evening, everyone, and we're back in business after a three-week break instead of a fortnight's break from our last session. And first of all, my apologies for sending you a wrong reference. I was just talking to Chris and saying, I don't know how the human brain works, but it sometimes surprises me. For some reason, I said read chapter 2 Luke instead of saying Matthew, because all of the topics are only from Matthew. Today's topics, tonight's topics. So here we go. Anyway, we'll start and read a little bit here from Matthew, from chapter 2. Just bear with me. Here we go. So so I'll read the whole part. The story of the adoration of the Magi, or the coming of the three kings. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and have come to worship him." When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And when he had gathered all the chief priests and scribes of the people together, he inquired of them whether Christ was to be born. So they said to him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written by the prophet, 'But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not the least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel.'" So that's from Micah, prophet Micah, chapter 5, verse 2. Then Herod, when he had secretly called the wise men, determined from them what time the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the young child, and when you have found him, bring back word to me, that I may come and worship him also." When they heard the king, they departed, and behold, the star which they had seen in the east went before them till it came and stood over the young child, over where the young child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceedingly great joy. And when they had come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary, his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented gifts to him, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Then, being divinely warned in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed for their own country another way. All right, so let's have a look at what this particular section is all about. First of all, this particular translation, New King James Version, the Orthodox Study Bible that I'm reading, of course, uses wise men, but certainly the expression Magi is well known. What does it mean? Well, where does it come from? It comes from, of course, the original Greek text, which says, Magi apo Anatolon. So Magi from the east. Now, the word Magi, that's plural, Magos, is actually a Persian word. And this is the reason why it has always been thought that the Magi came from Persia. And there's another interesting story that goes back to the destruction in the early 7th century by the Persians, who invaded the Holy Land at that time, and which of course was part of the Roman Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire. And the Persians destroyed all of the Christian temples except for the one in Bethlehem. Why? And tradition has it that they saw a mosaic which no longer survives, unfortunately. The building survives. It's the only Christian church in the Holy Land that predates the early 7th century. It was built by Queen Helen together with the great basilica in Jerusalem itself, over the holiest of the places, the tomb of Christ and place of crucifixion, and all of that. But that was badly damaged, but the Bethlehem one wasn't. And yes, as I was saying, a tradition has it that the Persian army saw a depiction of the Magi on the facade of the basilica, and they saw them in Persian, dressed as Persians, in this mosaic. So they decided not to touch that particular building. All right. So anyway, when did these wise men, Magi, or the three kings, when did they come? Well, it is clear that they came after the 40th day. After the 40th day from the birth of Christ, because a woman was not allowed to leave her home until these 40 days were over, and she then would first go to the temple to bring the sacrifices and receive the prayers, as we read in Luke's gospel last time. Now, in a number of, well, quite a few Western paintings, we see that the three kings, the wise men, the Magi, are represented together with the shepherds in the cave worshiping Christ, ostensibly on the same night that Christ was born. Well, that could not have happened. Why? Well, I'll explain in a minute, but I'll just add that Eastern iconography is more precise in that respect, because in doing the icon of the Nativity, it shows the shepherds close, to Christ and worshiping Him, but the Magi are still traveling on horseback. Okay, so why couldn't they have been there on the night? Well, first of all, Luke tells us, and we heard that. So when they had come into the house, see, so it's clear that it was sometime after the peak of the influx of people who had come for census purposes to Bethlehem. And when that peak of and the influx of people had subsided, there was no problem finding some sort of temporary accommodation. Obviously, the Holy Family rented a house. Okay. So why am I saying that the adoration of the Magi happened after the 40th day? Well, it's pretty clear that from the story that as soon as they got the message from the angel, both the wise men and Joseph, they realized that there was danger from Herod, and they departed immediately. They went to Egypt. So there's no way that they could have risked the life of the child by coming to Jerusalem after the visitation and the worship of the wise men. So clearly, the story, their visit happened after the 40th day. All right. Now, more on the actual timing of the star. And it says that Herod diligently inquired when the star appeared, and with this in mind, he ordered the slaying of infants from 2 years and younger, and 2 years down. So the star must have appeared roughly 2 years before Christ was born. It must indicate that the wise men took a while to get their act together and actually travel the distance, which would have taken some time as well. And they did not leave Persia straight away anyway. So why did they bother to undertake this journey at all? Why did they know about the newborn king? Because this is what they said. Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? Right? So, what was their source or sources of this knowledge? Well, first of all, we have chapter 2 in the book of Daniel, Prophet Daniel. A very interesting story there, and I suggest that you maybe jot this down, this reference, chapter 2, Daniel, and read the story. It's fascinating because the story goes like this. The Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar sees a terrifying dream. He has a nightmare. And then when he wakes up, he can't recall what he saw. But it was so distressing for him that he called all of his academics, because the Babylonians had this academy, and Daniel and the 3 youths whom we come across in the story of the furnace of Babylon. That's Anania, Azariah, and Mishael, right? Those 4 were especially talented, intellectually gifted young men who served together with the Babylonian scientists and philosophers in this academy. And the king threatened. He called his academics together and says, "I saw this terrifying dream. Your job is to remind me what I actually what it was, because I can't remember the dream, but it was terrifying. And secondly, you have to interpret and explain to me what this means." So Daniel and the three youths, they prayed very diligently for God to reveal to them what the king's dream was, and it was revealed that he saw this giant like idol composed of different materials, different metals, and the idol had clay feet. And then a stone broke off from a mountain, rolled down the mountain, hit this idol, and the idol, because its feet were vulnerable, it broke up. And then Daniel explained to the king later that first of all, he told him the dream, reminded him the dream that he had forgotten, and secondly, what it meant, that it represents different historical kingdoms, empires, and the last of these, the iron one, was the Roman Empire, and then another kingdom represented by the rock would destroy these kingdoms and last forever. Okay, and so this is the kingdom of the Messiah. Okay, so that's one source which would have been preserved in the archives of the academy. Now, the Persians later invaded Babylon, and they would have taken all of this material with them. Secondly, we have chapter 4 in Numbers. This is an interesting story that goes back to the passing of the Israelites, and King Balak, feeling that he was threatened by this little nation, he called upon a prophet who lived on the banks of the Euphrates in Babylonia, and he asked him to curse Israel. And this is the story how Balaam rides his donkey, and then when he comes close to the place where he was going to overlook the passing nation of Israel and pronounce these curses upon them, that his ass stopped and wouldn't go any further. And he was trying to beat it and says, "Come on, what's the matter with you?" And then the ass turned around and spoke to him in a human voice and says, "What's the problem? Can't you see there's an angel there? The angel won't let me pass through." And so that was very humbling for Balaam. And instead of cursing Israel, he pronounced these three blessings. And in one of the blessings, which is in chapter 24, verse 17, there are these words: "A star shall rise out of Jacob, and a man shall rise out of Israel." Now, the Old Testament rabbis, going back to pre-Christian times, saw this as a very clear-cut messianic passage. Okay. Finally, we have Daniel again, chapter 9, verses 25 to 27. And that's quite fascinating because that passage gives the timing for the appearance of the Messiah. And I won't read it. It talks about these 70 weeks. Now, the weeks are lots of 7 years for the Hebrews, for the Israelites. These, there was the Sabbath of days, but there was also a week of days, ending with the Sabbath. But also they thought in terms of sort of weeks of years, 7 years, and this is why Daniel speaks, or rather, it is revealed to him that the Messiah would come in a period of 70 weeks. Now, 70 times 7 is 490, which actually it talks about the. Let me just read you at least a little bit from that passage because it is rather fascinating. Okay, let me find it. Dream. This is okay. Yes, 70 weeks are determined for your people and for your city, holy city, to finish sin and to set an end to sin, to wipe out lawlessness, to atone for wrongdoings, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the Holy of Holies. You shall know, therefore, and understand that from the going forth of the word to be answered and to build Jerusalem until Christ the Prince, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks, and the time shall return After 62 weeks, the anointed one shall be put to death, yet there shall be no upright judgment for him, and he shall destroy the city and the sanctuary with the prince who is coming, etc., etc. So it's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem as well after the killing of the anointed one, the Messiah. And the ancient 2nd century Roman writer Hippolytus says that it talks about Jesus the Messiah that would be crucified in AD 30, about 490 years, 70 weeks of 7 years after Artaxerxes commissioned Ezra to rebuild Jerusalem in 458 BC. Right, so that's quite interesting. Now, so what was this star that the wise men saw? Okay, it has been suggested. Now, I'm reading from my 1984 notes, and at that time, it seemed like the most plausible explanation for the star was an alignment of three planets in the year 747 from the foundation of Rome, so which was calculated by the astronomers. The alignment of Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars, which would have produced a very bright star in the constellation of Pisces. Okay. Now, the interesting thing is that in the astrological beliefs of the ancient Middle East, and also these things spread, they were developed in Babylon because the Babylonians did a lot of astronomy, astronomical observations, and they diligently kept all of these tables of their observations. And this information spread to the other civilizations within the Mediterranean basin, like the Greeks and the Romans. People of the Roman Empire certainly all knew something about astrology. It was very popular. And what the Babylonia, beginning with the Babylonians, they developed this idea of the 12 constellations. So what the astrologers use to this day, these constellations, which of course are unrelated groups of stars, because they did not have any appreciation of the immense depth of field, but they were understood in like a two-dimensional perception of dots on a flat surface. So they imagined these pictures. So the 12 constellations, yes, they covered 360-degree picture of the sky. It was the Babylonians that developed this system using numbers, like 12, 60, 360, based on numbers with a great number of factors. It's mathematically quite important. And they were able to produce very large numbers. So what the Babylonians noticed also through their diligent observations is that they would, for instance, every year was an important day of the year, the vernal equinox, the day when in spring, this is, we're talking about the northern hemisphere, the day and the night were of exactly equal length. And so 21st of March, they would note where the sun set on that day, and observing it over hundreds of years, they noticed that these constellations actually were moving. It was like an immense clock. I don't remember exactly how many years, but it's about 2,000 years that takes each of the constellations to change to the next one. So at the time when Christ was born, it was the beginning of the age of Pisces. Now, this is an added reason why the wise men would have known to go to Jerusalem. They didn't know where to go after that. This is why they came to Jerusalem to talk to Herod and to get to find out if Herod the king knew anything about the newborn king. But you see, the appearance of a bright star in the constellation of Pisces meant that a great person was born. Well, it communicated to them immediately that a great person was born in Israel, because Pisces was the constellation of Israel, right? So just as the other constellations stood for other nations, and especially in the Middle East. All right. So now, just to give you another bit of trivia, you know that in 1967 the rock musical Hair appeared, and there was a song Aquarius. This is the dawning of the age of Aquarius. Now, Aquarius is the next. So in that time, the constellations had moved and it was close to Pisces, to Aquarius. Okay, I'm not exactly sure if we're in Aquarius now, but okay. So the New Agers are the people who believe that, you know, the Christian age, the age of Pisces, has passed. Now, you know also that to this day, lots of people have bumper stickers with the sign of Pisces, the fish, which is also an ancient Christian symbol, because the ancient Gentiles, I mean, the Israelites, the Jews, were not much into this astrology stuff, but the Gentiles certainly were. And they realized that this was the beginning of the age of Pisces, and they used this symbol of the fish, which actually also can be deciphered. If you take the first word of the first letter of the words, Jesus Christ, God's Son, Savior in Greek, ichthys, this is the ancient word for fish in Greek, in ancient Greek. The modern Greek word is different, sari. So you see, there's quite an involved connection with astronomy and astrology here. Now, why does, of course, Christianity is not very positive about astrology, but this was the Lord's way of speaking to those, to the Gentiles who, you know, God speaks in our language. So he spoke to them to say, well, to spoke to the wise men and said, right, the Messiah, the great King, is born. His star appeared in Pisces. Okay. So enough about that, but it is quite fascinating, and there's a lot more that could be said here. But anyway, why does it say, and I'll just remind you, when Herod the king heard this, their question, you know, where is he who's been born the king of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and have come to worship him. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. Why would Herod be troubled? Well, the immediate thought here is that Herod felt rather vulnerable because, as I explained to you last time, he was not Jewish. Okay, he was an Edomian, right, from the south. He was a Semite, but he was not Jewish, not Israelite. He tried very hard to make himself popular with the Jews by spending a lot of time and effort and money on expanding the temple. So he would have felt really, really sort of paranoid about any king that would come from, you know, a Jewish background. And suddenly he's told about, you know, newborn king. Secondly, there's another political reason for it, because Palestine was in the borderlands with the the adjacent. It was on the eastern borderlands with the adjacent empire, the empire of the Persians of Parthians, and they actually defeated the Romans on 2 occasions. Now, suddenly Herod sees these people who come from the east, wearing Persian clothing. So he thought, oh, gee, what is this all about? Maybe this new king could use the enemies of Rome to gain power in Israel and to get rid of him as well. So it says all of Jerusalem was troubled with him. Well, all of Jerusalem meant the elite, because they depended on the Romans as well. And as we know from the end of the gospel story, that they finally decide that it's better for them to get rid of this troublemaker king of the Jews, in order to keep their influence and their power under the protection, the umbrella of Rome. So their paranoia begins as soon as he is born. The elites, the ruling party, was also fearful of Herod because he was known for his extreme cruelty. He killed his own wife and his own son. And when Augustus, Emperor Octavian, heard about this, he said, with Herod, it's better to be a pig than a son. Safer. So Herod secretly called the wise men, and he talks to them privately so that nobody else knows. And it's clear that the wise men believed him, that he would go, that he wanted to worship the king. And this is why they had to be told, see, being divinely warned in the dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed for their own country another way. So they would have just crossed into what is now the king, what is the kingdom of Jordan. All right. Now, Herod, of course, did not know the Bible, and he called the scribes and the chief priests and said, where is Christ to be born? And they said, in Bethlehem of Judea, because prophet Micah says that, this is where the Messiah should be born. Now, mind you, I'm not sure if I mentioned last time, but Bethlehem is a very interesting toponymic place name, because Bethlehem means house of bread. Now we find out later that Jesus Christ speaks of himself as the bread from heaven. So wasn't it appropriate for him to be born in the house of bread in Bethlehem? Okay. So they bring the gifts, gold, and frankincense, and myrrh, and these gifts had a symbolic meaning as well, because gold represented the gift of gold spoke of him, of Christ, as a king, because gold is given, in taxes to the king. Frankincense speaks of him as God, because incense is used for worship, in worship. And myrrh speaks of him as one who was to die, because myrrh was used in the Middle East for anointing dead bodies, among other things. That's a precious fragrance. But of course, these gifts also served a very important practical purpose for the Holy Family when they had to spend some time in Egypt, and they were very poor. So these gifts were valuable, and they sustained them while they were in Egypt. Now, okay, so let's read now the next bit, refuge in Egypt. Now, when they had departed, that's the wise men, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, arise, take the young child and his mother, flee to Egypt, and stay there until I bring you word. For Herod will seek the young child to destroy him. When he arose, he took the young child and his mother by night and departed for Egypt, and was there until the death of Herod, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the Lord through the prophet, saying, out of Egypt I called my son. All right, just a quick comment about that. Now, out of Egypt I called my son. It's a prophecy of Hosea, chapter 11, verse 1. And Matthew quotes the prophet about calling the son out of Egypt. Well, first of all, in the Old Testament, this expression, my son, is often attributed to the whole nation of Israel, and speaks of Moses taking out the delivering the nation of Israel from Egypt. That's firstly. So that was a typological reference to Exodus from Egypt. Now, the other typology is that just like the ancient nation of Israel, before it left Egypt, hundreds of years before it left Egypt under Moses, Jacob, the patriarch, and his 12 sons sought refuge when they were called by the second youngest son, Joseph, who had become the prince of Egypt, right? So they were saved in Egypt. And Joseph tells his brothers that God had sent him to Egypt for their salvation. Okay, and in the same way, Egypt becomes the refuge for the Son of God himself. All right, the last bit, the holy innocents. Then Herod, when he saw that he was deceived by the wise men, was exceedingly angry, and he sent forth and put to death all the male children who were in Bethlehem and in all this district from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had determined from the wise men. Then was fulfilled what was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet, saying, a voice was heard in Ramah, lamentation, weeping, and great mourning. Rachel weeping for her children, refusing to be comforted, because they are no more. This is from the prophet Jeremiah, chapter 38, verse 15. Now, Jeremiah lived at the time when Israel was forcibly taken to Babylonia. The best, the strongest, and the young families, and that as conscripted labor force. And Jeremiah lamented over this, and this is he's talking of Rachel weeping for her children, a symbolic way of referring to Rachel's one of the wives of the patriarchs. Okay, Jacob's wife. Yes. Right. So, return from exile. Now, when Herod was dead, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, saying, "Arise, take the young child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who sought the young child's life are dead." Then he arose, took the young child and his mother, and came into the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judea instead of his father, Herod, he was afraid to go there. And being warned by God in a dream, he turned aside into the region of Galilee. And he came and dwelt in a city called Nazareth, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophets, he shall be called a Nazarene. Yes, well, firstly, note that the angel said, take the young child and his mother and go to the land of Israel. They didn't quite sort of understand what the angel was referring to, but the angel was being specific because, they themselves thought they should return to Bethlehem where he was born, because Bethlehem is the city of David and is the proper place for the Messiah to be growing up in preparation for his rule. But the angel said, go to Israel. Now, remember I explained to you either last time or in our earlier session that after King David, after Solomon, the kingdom split into two parts. The northern part, which was still called Israel, and the southern part, which called Judea. Now, the angel said, go to Israel. Galilee was in the northern part. So you see, Israel. Okay, now, concerning the words of Matthew, and he says, he came and dwelt in a city called Nazareth, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophets, that he shall be called a Nazarene. Well, in actual fact, there is no direct prophecy like that he shall be called a Nazarene. But it's sort of a combination of a number of things. First of all, when Pilate ordered an inscription on the cross of Jesus, he wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. Okay, so this is his sort of Nazarene origin, Jesus of Nazareth, and that was written in 3 languages. Secondly, Christ himself, out of humility, he allowed himself to be called a Nazarene, because Nazareth, as we know from the story of Philip, introducing the Christ to his friend Nathaniel. When he tells Nathaniel says, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" So Nazareth was such a backwater, such a a very, very humble place, and Christ liked that. That's his humility. Finally, he shall be called a Nazarene. You see, I mentioned in one of our earlier talks that there existed in the Old Testament a rite of dedication of these Nazarenes. And Samson and Delilah, remember? Samson was one of these Nazarenes, and they did not cut their hair, beard, and stuff like that. Okay, so these were, the Nazarenes were people who were dedicated to God. This is why Christ, of course, as a human being, he's dedicated totally to God. And in iconography, in the way that we see him from the earliest times, his depictions are, with long hair and a beard, okay, except for very early Western catacomb paintings. But that reflects the Western Roman culture, because in Rome, all men shaved. They did not wear beards, and they did not wear long hair either. Okay, so that would have been strange for the Roman Christians to visualize Christ this way, with long hair and a beard. But of course, later on, even in the West, the West acquired the iconic picture of Christ, the way that he's represented in Eastern iconography too, as a Nazarene. All right, so this is it for tonight, and we're getting close to 8 o'clock. So, Chris, do we have any questions there?
No questions.
Wonderful.
Good turnout, though.
All right. So, look, well, you'll all get an email from our secretary, Costa.
Costa's here.
Yes.
Costa's
Okay.
here.
It's very good. With the references for next time and the topics. I just haven't got them prepared because I've just come back to Melbourne after a short time away, and here we go.
The 7th is the next.
The
7th.
Oh, yes. Nail down the date.
You might want to consider in person. You might want to consider in person.
Consider what?
Consider doing it in person.
Oh, because we're opening up. Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, that's something to consider, of course. We might be able to invite a number of people, but it will be a limited number.
Yep, but we could stream and still have a few people if
because
they want.
We'd have an audience, a small audience inside the church.
Mm-hmm.
Makes it easier for me, and it's more lively when I can actually see some a live audience and interact with them, and also imagine the audience beyond the camera. All right, so 7 p.m. Okay, Costa, can you please remind me before Costa always writes to me and says, okay, every time, what to write in the email. So keep that in mind, that we'll sort of research how many people we could invite, and probably they would need to text me or email me or something just to get a confirmation, that first in, first served kind of number. Okay.
Absolutely.
Right. Okay. So let me.
I shall do that, Father. Thank you.
Thank you, Costa. Yeah. Okay. Good. All right. Prayer. It is truly made to bless thee, O Theotokos, ever blessed and most pure, and the Mother of our God, more honorable than the cherubim, beyond compare, more glorious than the seraphim, without corruption. They gave us birth to God the Word. True Theotokos, thee do we magnify. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Costa, and thank you, everybody. And see you, God willing, on the 7th of November.